Hello, everybody, and welcome to Joyfully Centered. I'm Heather Rausch, your host, and this is our JC Chats series. Today, we have a really powerful and wonderful conversation that I'm really excited about with our special guest, Bonnie Roill. So, Bonnie's here on screen with me, and the topic that we're talking about today has to do with a healthy, happy, joyful gut and what that looks like. And it's so important for us in order to be able to feel joyfully centered to have a healthy gut. So I'm excited for this topic. And before we get started, I'm going to read Bonnie's bio and then officially welcome her. So Bonnie has been living her passion, providing nutritional and well-being guidance for over 40 years. Combining her extensive knowledge as a registered dietitian nutritionist, complemented with her accreditation as a personal trainer, health and wellness coach, and hormone support coach, provides the foundation to support on a multitude of nutrition, exercise, and well-being needs. Bonnie's interest in digestive health started decades ago as she navigated her own gut challenges. For over 12 years in her private practice, Bonnie guided others on how to create a happier gut. Prior to that, she spent over 25 years in hospitals and doctors' offices, both in the United States and overseas. Bonnie personally knows that an unhappy gut can eat away at the joys in life. Even in retirement, her place of joy is helping others discover how they can create a healthier gut. Besides her passion for all things to do with nutrition, she loves cat videos, watching Masterpiece Theater, and Harry Potter. So, Bonnie, welcome to Joyfully Centered and JC Chats. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you, Heather, so much for inviting me.
I am so excited to have you. I've known you for a while now. I've been a happy client of yours as well. And I know that you are just the best expert for this topic on our gut and our gut nutrition and all of this. So I'm really excited to have you. And I know that, as I said, right, when our gut's not happy and healthy, we don't feel joy at all. It's kind of a miserable place to be, right? When we're not feeling well with that. So before we get started in all the details and stuff of our conversation, can you just share with our listeners, in case they're not familiar with this, what are some of these common, gut disorders that we're talking about?
Okay, well, some of the common gut disorders that most people probably have experienced at some time in their life has been maybe heartburn, even just something like excessive bloating or abdominal distension. But then it can get into something more serious, like even the formation of ulcers, or it can become something known as irritable bowel syndrome, or it can be something very serious like inflammatory bowel disease. And then, of course, you have the very serious end result of something like colon cancer. And that's because a lot of people don't realize that our GI tract actually starts in our mouth. So even when you have something like gingivitis, that's the beginning of a gut disorder because we swallow, goes down to our esophagus to our stomach, and not everything gets killed in our stomach. Some of these bacteria, viruses, parasites keep traveling on, and that's when they can cause their havoc when they get going down into the small and large intestine. So it really is a very long, hollow tube, we like to call it. And so there's a lot of mileage to travel, and so a lot can happen during that journey.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, who would have thought, right? Not knowing as much as you do, obviously, with that, I would never have really thought of it in that way, but that makes a lot of sense. So, when we spoke earlier, you had mentioned that there was an interesting findings that there's been double-digit increases in some of these gut disorders in that. So, what do you think's causing this, or what would you attribute this to, or what should we know about all of
Well,
this?
I'll go back to before the pandemic, because before the pandemic, there was an always estimate that in the United States, we had about a 10% of our population was experiencing IBS, the irritable bowel syndrome, because that's very, people can relate to that one. And then we found after the pandemic, we started seeing it swinging upwards. And I've seen numbers as high as 15% now. And before, it used to be more related more to a certain segment of the population. Definitely women seem to be more prone than men, and a certain age range. But now we're seeing very young women having a lot of digestive issues that are driving them to their doctor's offices. And this is why we're able to get more data on this. So obviously, when we think of the pandemic, we all have probably a memory of how stressful it was, especially in the beginning, and especially when many people were very isolated. And for some people, we know that this can be a real trigger for any kind of digestive issues, because of the fact that the gut, which within our gut is that big word we probably have all heard, the microbiome. And you really can think of the microbiome now as an organ, because it does like over 1,000 functions in our body. But not only that, it is connected to just about every other organ. So we have the gut brain axis, what they call. We have the gut bone, which is very interesting to women that are especially if you're looking at maybe having osteoporosis. And now we can see the connection between what's happening in the gut and whether we develop osteoporosis or not. So that gut-brain connection is something that you do see often now in printed material and on the internet, because of the fact it is something we can do something about. We don't even need to go to a doctor's office in some respects. We can learn how to do things to make us more joyful. We can do things like diaphragmatic breathing, even just simple belly breath, what we call. Doing things that you know bring you joy is going to help your gut symptoms. One of the simplest things I do when I was in practice is the very first thing I would try to get people to realize is when you sit down to eat, you've got to move yourself from what we call the sympathetic mode, which is that part of us where we're, running all around all day, working in that. And if we sit down and we don't kind of switch that off and go to the parasympathetic, which is also known as the rest and digest, we can't even produce the digestive enzymes to break down our food. And this is why, and this is why we might have indigestion after a meal, the bloating, because things just aren't going down like they should. So the simplest thing we can do is even before we sit down to eat, make sure your feet are flat on the floor, close your eyes to decrease all the sensory coming in, and just take a couple of maybe 3 deep inhales and exhales through your mouth. And that's going to help to move you into that parasympathetic. And the thing that's nice about that too is has been shown to decrease your cortisol level anywhere from 20 to 25%. And then this way, when you sit down to eat, you've kind of really got yourself ready to just focus and be mindful on your eating.
Wow, I like that. It really is being more intentional, right? Is what I hear
Exactly.
you saying. So,
Mhm.
I can say I've been guilty of not being intentional. Now that we're talking about this, and you and I have talked about this before as well, but not being intentional, just sitting down and going, okay, it's time to eat, and then just diving into that, right? So,
Or just
really,
checking it off your list of things to do as I used to do when I was younger. So you're not the only one. And I used to tell the people I worked with, I work on this every day myself. This is not something, because we live in a real, very fast-paced world. Things are coming at us all the time. So can we do it for every meal? Maybe not. But I think if we can do it for the meal, especially the dinner meal, because it is the last meal of the day, and we brought all that the stress of the day with us. If we can do it for that meal, even that's a good start, because it really is going to help. I've seen it when I've shared this with a female client, and then they come back and they say, guess what? My husband's doing it too, and he's burping less at the table. So, so something that costs no money and is totally in your control and can be I always say the simple things sometimes are where we do get the most joy in life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I can see us even being able to do that, even if we're eating at our desk, right? For those of us that are multitasking and doing so many different things, if we just remember to take a simple breath, right? Take a deep
Right.
breath and kind of ground ourselves, like you said, put our feet on the floor. Even that alone, right, would be a great step. And then if we also incorporate, like you said, at the dinner meal, taking that even further, I could see how that could have some immediate impact and
Mhm.
really just center us
Right.
and thereby making everything else work better, right, within
Mhm.
our body.
Right.
Wow. Okay, so that's a great tip right off the get-go here. So, So stress, we're saying does play a part in it. Talk about too with us, does the foods, what we're eating, which foods we're choosing or which foods we're avoiding or any of that. How do we know, what's important there?
Yeah, and it is really getting more difficult. I've shared with many people, even as someone as a seasoned dietitian like myself, there's just so much hype out there regarding superfoods and only eat this food or you must eat this food every day. It sounds so dire sometimes and so unrealistic. Quite frankly, is very unrealistic. So I spend a lot of time trying to help people navigate that. And just getting back to your original question, really diet has probably the biggest impact on our gut. Now, there are other things that do. Our environment. Are we living someplace where it's very polluted? Believe it or not, that can make a difference. Do we have our food? Does it have heavy metals in it? Lead, etc. Medications we take. This is so often overlooked. We know that when people are taking what we call the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, like your over-the-counter aspirin or even ibuprofen, these things actually wear down the intestinal barrier, the gut lining, and that's not good because in that microbiome in our gut, about 80–90% of our immune cells are found. So if we're breaking that down, we are directly affecting our immunity, which makes it very difficult to fight off viruses. And also there's a connection then with that wearing down that gut with autoimmune diseases. So this may be another reason why we've seen a double-digit increase over the decades in autoimmune diseases, because our guts are being, constantly being have these items at them, these chemicals that they really aren't meant to be there. Another thing is we talked about the stress, also just genetics. A lot of times some of this stuff is genetic. There are some genes that they have found that correspond with IBS, but as I always like to say, genes are not your destiny. That's an important thing to always remember, that we can make changes. And that's what's so exciting about being able to do something about changing your microbiome to make it healthier, because we can't change our DNA. We can't change that genetic component there, but we know from research that just in as little as 24 hours, we can start to change our microbiome to be healthier. We've actually seen it that even in 5 or 7 days, we can turn around a microbiome to have different bacteria in there, more beneficial bacteria. Some of the bullies, as I like to call, their numbers are a little bit lower. So food is probably the biggest factor regarding a healthier gut.
Wow. So how do people know where to start, with that, right? So if they say, okay, I'm starting to, think I'm experiencing some things here, I don't know really where to start, or I don't know what to do. What would you say to that?
Well, the first thing is, it depends on those symptoms. I would tell anybody, like always would share with my clients, is if somebody's experiencing something where it's causing them to see blood in their stool, or they're waking up in the middle of the night needing to use the bathroom for a bowel movement, or they're having severe pains, first thing they need to do is go see a gastroenterologist. You do need to see a specialist, because those things aren't what we'd expect the human body to do. That's a distress signal from the body. Something's gone awry. And it might be something very minimal, like the blood in the stool may be hemorrhoids. Something that not 80% of the population has them, but it might be something more serious. So we don't want to self-diagnose ourselves, which I see a lot because of social media and the internet. We don't want to think every pain is IBS or inflammatory bowel disease. We want to make sure first we rule everything out, because there are several diagnoses that can mimic IBS. And I've had clients come to me, tell me, oh, I know I have IBS. And I've said, have you been diagnosed? No. And they say, please go to your doctor. And we find out that's not what they had. They had a malabsorption of fats. So that's another road, but I'm just saying, don't self-diagnose, because you can waste a lot of time, not only hurt yourself, but waste a lot of time and money. So probably the best thing to do is to just realize that you really have the power in the plate, as we like to say. You really need to think about what you're eating. And the problem is, I know a lot of people, again, they jump in this idea that they have to have blueberries every morning because they heard it's great for cognition. Yeah, it is. But guess what? You don't need to have it every day. There's no guarantee if you have a half a cup of blueberries every day, you're not going to develop some kind of digestive issue or Alzheimer's. There's no guarantee to any of this. The biggest guarantee is variety. We know from all the research that the more variety we have in our diet, the better it is for the microbiome. And that's because basically the diversity comes in that all these foods are chemicals. Always have to think about food is a chemical. It's coming in there, it's broken down, and the bacteria that's in there, some of these bacteria, they're looking for one very specific, all they do is eat one chemical. And they need that chemical, and maybe blueberries doesn't have it. maybe it's a raspberry, maybe it's a pineapple, papaya, but they need that. And if they don't get it, their numbers may go down. And when their numbers go down, somebody else's have to go up. And sometimes that can be more of the, what I always call the bullies, the bacteria that we don't want to have a lot of. And that's when we can start to get that imbalance in the gut, or some people might have heard the expression dysbiosis. So that's why variety in the diet is definitely the biggest thing that people need to do. Now, when I say variety, we had what they called the gut project that was done, I think in 2018, and it was done throughout the United States, the UK, and Australia. And it was over 10,000 people, believe it or not, marked down everything they ate for like weeks on end. Plus, they gave stool samples periodically to the scientist. So this was an incredible, really 3-country study that was done. And it showed the people that had the biggest variety had the healthiest microbiome. Now, what was the number? Because everybody goes, well, what's the number? The number was 30 different plants. And so we go back to that again. Plant-based foods are the type of foods that the microbiome needs to survive. They don't really need meat. I hate to say this, but they really don't need meat, fish, or chicken, but they do need plant-based foods. And when I say plant-based foods, I'm talking about everything from what you think of, vegetables and fruits, but also nuts and seeds. So, pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, cashews, pistachios, legumes, lentils, herbs. People don't realize herbs are a type of food that the microbiome loves. So everything, especially like from rosemary to turmeric, ginger, these are some of the things that we know that actually help to soothe an unhappy gut. So if you are having nausea, ginger is well known to help to reduce that nausea. And then things like other spices even that are out there, and grains. A lot of people think that, oh, we shouldn't eat any grains. Again, that could be up for debate, but I'll kind of address that later. But if you look at grains, we're looking at making sure we're not having white rice, we're having brown rice. And that's because what those chemicals in the brown rice, there are specific bacteria. They're going to take those chemicals along with the fiber that's in brown rice, and they're going to make something called short chain fatty acids for us. And that's what we need to have a healthy colon. The only thing our colon can really run on, because it needs calories too, right? It needs to eat, and it can only run on short chain fatty acids. And so if we don't have the microbes making those, then the colon's not going to be happy. And an unhappy colon can lead to either diarrhea or constipation, or eventually can lead into colon cancer.
Wow. Well, we don't want any of that. So I'm
Yep.
glad we're talking about that. So, and I know, I mean, we could talk about this for a long time because it's really a complex topic. Yet, as you said, I love to see that there's things that we can be doing, right? To be proactive with it. So, variety in the diet. Are there any other things that we should be aware of
Probably
specifically?
Right. Specifically too, I think, I'm talking about adding foods when I say variety in the diet, which is good. I
Okay.
always like to go that direction, adding, because nobody wants to have something taken away from them. But there is one classification of foods, a category of foods, which we have seen. And I can remember when the research was about 20 years ago, first starting, and people were kind of skeptical. And they were like, oh, I don't think this really makes much of a difference. I even heard doctors say to people that had inflammatory bowel disease, it doesn't matter how you eat, which we know now is totally untrue. But that is what we call ultra processed foods. And when I use that category, that it's an actual food science term, ultra processed foods are not referring to the frozen peas and carrots in your freezer. Frozen vegetables, frozen fruits are not ultra processed. In fact, if anything, they're flash frozen. They can actually have more nutrients and more polyphenols, etc., than are fresh. We're talking about when you go to the freezer section and you purchase like these dinner packets, these dinner meals where everything's included and there's usually some sort of a seasoning sauce packet. That's a really good example of an ultra processed food. It is everything that's in there has had to have some sort of a high refinement to it, chemicals added to it to be able to have the shelf longevity, preservation, and to make it very tasty. And sometimes they take out fat, so they add more sugar, whatever they have to do to appease the human palate, and they know what people like, they're going to do. Another one that I think most people don't think is as ultra processed, but it's all this plethora of nutrition bars we have out there. No matter what they say out there, they are an ultra processed food because they're taking maybe oatmeal, and which is a wonderful food. It's a wonderful combination of what we call soluble, insoluble fibers. So it helps not only to feed the microbiome, but helps to maintain a better blood sugar regulation. And they're taking it and they're either grinding it down really small because people don't want big flakes, right? And and then they're adding a lot of corn syrup solids to it, which is basically just throwing tons of sugar on it. And they might throw in some cashews. So it looks, when you look at the label, you might say, oh, this looks really healthy. But it really is a very highly processed food. And then over the last decade, in order to meet a labeling requirement to be able to say this is a high fiber food, many foods, everything from nutrition bars to ice cream, are adding in a type of functional fiber called inulin. And inulin comes from nature. It's not something they're making really up in a laboratory. It comes from sunchoke, artichokes, chicory root, etc. But it is, for many people, it is very difficult to digest. So for anyone that does have a tender tummy, if you know that, oh, I get bloated very easily, if you have something with inulin in it, you are most likely to start getting more symptoms of bloating and even gas production. I've seen I remember when nutrition bars first came out, and I would start asking people like how many you were eating a week. And then I had to start saying how many you're eating a day, because people were living on these because, one, it's fast and convenient and they taste good. They always have chocolate on them, right? Great, and just love chocolate, right? And then people would say, well, the bar, it says it's 11 grams of fiber and it says it's got nuts in it. I know nuts are good for you, not realizing that this inulin was actually the trigger for their gas and bloating. And if we took that away, we would immediately see a decrease in it. So it was, yeah, it was really disappointing when I saw the food manufacturers turn to inulin to add it to ice cream, because they wanted to be able to say it was lower in carbs, because that's what it can do also. It can lower the carb load, but not telling people that if you eat too much of this, you can actually get diarrhea. And they don't tell you that. And so I've had people say to me, the minute they say, I can't even eat ice cream anymore, this particular brand I love, because I find I get really gassy, and it's not even, I'm not lactose intolerant. That's not what it is. And when I say, show me what company, and it's right on the label, it's the inulin. So it's not that inulin is a bad food. It's just, it has to be, you have to look at it in moderation, and you have to look at it as, why are you putting it into the food when it's something that's natural? If you're eating an artichoke when they're in season, that's great. That's a prebiotic, that's a great form of fiber, just everything. But to start putting it into everything we eat, that's an example of how we always seem to run into problems.
Wow, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That really does. And there's so much, so again, so many things we wouldn't just know. So I so appreciate you sharing your expertise with us today. And we're running out of time. So I just want to make sure, there's so many great nuggets that you've shared through our conversation today. So a few things that I took away that I wrote down, that I just want to reiterate. So we want to pay attention to what we're eating, right? And watch those ultra processed foods. When we do go to eat, we want to take a deep breath and ground before we start eating, right? So that we can really get to that parasympathetic, you called it, right? Place there. And add variety into our diet. Did I get some main points there, Bonnie, or is there?
Right. I mean, that's a great starting point.
Okay.
And once somebody, if they do feel that they've gotten that foundation and their stomach is behaving well, it's got, joy, sending out joyful vibes, it's happy, then we would maybe say at that point, let's look at adding some fermented foods, because fermented foods have been shown actually in some ways to be more beneficial for our gut than even high fiber foods. This was a big when this research came out last year at Stanford University. It just shook the nutrition world because we all thought, oh, there's no way fermented foods are going to be better than fiber for the gut. Well, it showed they were. And when we're talking about fermented foods, I like to think of the 4 Ks: kefir, which is almost like liquid yogurt, kimchi, kombucha, and sauerkraut or kraut. So those are the 4 Ks, but you just have to make sure the kraut is actually fermented. So you're going to find it in your supermarket in the refrigerated section. It's not the kind in a can because there's no, the fermentation hasn't been done. So that would probably be after someone's gut is working well, then I would start to add those in. And when someone says, well, how much do I add in? The thing about like kimchi, these are condiments. We're talking about teaspoons, tablespoons. This is not something you need to, like I have kefir about 3 times a week, and I probably have a half a cup when I do. And that's enough. There's about, I think there's about 10 times the probiotics in the same amount of kefir as there would be in regular yogurt. So you're actually getting more bang for your dollar too by having that. And so I like to just have that. I might add even a little bit of a green type of banana to it because I'm getting a little resistant starch in there. And so, you get your feed, basically every time I sit down to think, I think, how can I feed my gut better? Because my gut is what's keeping me healthy.
That's a good way to look at it. And I'm glad to hear that with the sauerkraut. I like to eat it just like spoonfuls.
That is how
So
you're
there
supposed
you
to have it,
go.
right?
It's
Yeah, that's
actually good for me. Yay. So, well, very good. Well, Bonnie, again, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to have more conversations, you and I, and hopefully we'll do them on Joyfully Centered because it's just such great information. And again, people don't know what they don't know, right? So thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. And before we go, I just want to ask you, what's one thing that you're doing these days that helps you to feel joyfully centered? What's one thing?
Well, I have to thank you, Heather. I joining your book club. I really, yeah, I had gotten away from reading nonfiction books because, as you can tell, I love everything to do with science. And so when I read that nonfiction book, I had such a relaxation of being able to just spend time on my Kindle, which I hadn't picked up in years, and start reading. And then so it's now spawned me where I'm reading my Kindle on more books, and things like that, just enjoying my free time and just knowing that it does make me feel really happy to immerse myself into a totally different world and to learn about other people and how writers write, people and things like that. So I have you to thank for bringing a little bit of joy into my life.
Well, good. I didn't know that's what you were going to say, I swear. So, but it was, yeah, I love our book club too. And I'm so glad that you're enjoying it as well. It's one of those it's an easy book club, right? We have fun conversations. We read all different genres. So I'm glad that you're enjoying it as much as I do. And if anybody else is listening that wants to join our book club, by all means, join us for that as well. You can get more information on the Joyfully Centered website. But again, Bonnie, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. It's been so fun talking to you, as it always is, and I appreciate you very much.
Thank you, Heather.
So, and for everybody listening, thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you at an upcoming event, whether it's virtual or in person. And we hope that you continue to have a joyfully centered life and week. Thank you, guys. Bye.